she said, I always have to try to have 3 different conflicts happening to the character at the same time. And they're all not of the same magnitude. So for example.
Can you explain how you outline a screenplay?
Yeah, so outlines. I'd say, so first you have the idea, right? Or you have the concept, so to speak. And some people have high concepts, you know, like, which are easier to explain in a few words. I usually have low concepts in the sense that they're character driven, and that's, in a way, it's more challenging because you gotta find out what makes them distinctive from other ideas. You know, maybe the juice, the beauty of it is not in the concept, but in the world and the character. So I do a beat sheet first, and I use an exercise that Hal Ackerman talks about, who I had class with at UCLA, called snow plowing. And snow plowing is basically you set out a certain amount of time. Could be 20 minutes, could be 40 or an hour. Usually you don't do more than an hour at a time. And you write down possible scenes without judging them and not stopping, right? So it doesn't matter if they contradict one another. You just keep going. So, because they're just possibilities. They're not the whole final thing. And ideally, you write. I don't use a computer then. I just write it down manually. And let's say you do 20 minutes and you just go nonstop. Because if you stop, you're going to judge it. And the point is not to judge yourself. The point is to discover. So you do this exercise a few times over and over again, and then you go back to it, and then you pick and discard. Like, okay, this is good. This one, doesn't work, or I'm going to just pick this option. And I'd say after a few times of doing that, you start having a sense of what the structure is. Of course, you can also guide yourself with books, right? Save the Cat has an option of what a structure is. I mean, I feel like intuitively you know that your structure needs ups and downs and beats of all kinds, and you kind of have a midpoint. So by snow plowing and then by going back to the idea of structure, you come up with the beats. And once you have the beats, which are the bones, the outline is like giving that connective tissue, right? So once I'm confident about my beat sheet, then I just start filling out those bones with flesh, which is not too much detail, but enough detail to connect the scenes and make sure that there's a cause and effect relationship between them. And you just expand. So I would say I don't skip any of the steps. From idea, I go to beat sheet. From beat sheet, I go to outline. I don't need my outlines to be too detailed. I just need them to have the necessary information, especially if I want to have like setups and payoffs. I want to make sure those are in the outline. And then you just start writing.
When you're writing these scenes that you don't want to judge, and they might be random scenes, are they ones you've already had in your mind, or are you almost manufacturing them so that the most ridiculous idea, like this would never really happen, and then once you go back and look at it, you think, well, actually we could lead to that?
No, the point is to surprise yourself. Actually, it's a very different, the creative mind that you apply is very different. You have like your right side of the brain and your left side of the brain, right? And I feel like most of the time in the real world, we're being very rational. So if you start writing from that perspective, you're going to come up with probably conventional ideas. And there's nothing wrong with cliches, by the way. I think they're a great starting point. When you don't know what to do, just write down the cliche so you can get it out of the way. That's better than nothing. And sometimes I feel we get blocked because you try to write the most original thing ever, and you don't do that right away. It's really hard. So maybe it's easier to write a cliche and then maybe change a few things and maybe let it evolve and turn. Or for example, I always want to set a scene in the most original location, right? So instead of setting it at the character's house, which would be the obvious thing because they're going to discuss something intimate, what if they're in church, right? And that, of course, makes the conversation more awkward and maybe funny, and they can't really talk. Great, but does it serve the story? You don't want to be eccentric just for the sake of being eccentric. But maybe you plan the scene in the character's house, and then once you have it, okay, what if I change the location? And maybe it works. But you don't go all the way at once. You want to take it gradually, and once you have it, okay, if I change location, would she say this in public? If she said this in public, maybe it's funny, maybe it's ridiculous. I don't know. Sorry, I got lost in my own logic there. Oh, yeah, so originality. I feel like it's desirable to be original and you don't want to be lazy. But sometimes some scenes can only take place in one location, right? I mean, if the character is in prison, there are not infinite options, right? If someone's visiting, they can only meet in the visiting space, right? There's no other option. But if you have time and you want to make it better, maybe explore with certain scenes unexpected locations.
Can you give me examples of these cliches?
What's a cliche? Well, I mean, with characters, it's easy because stereotypes and archetypes, right? And we see this all the time. So, the cop, the preacher, the prostitute, right? The bossy wife. You don't want to play those characters exactly the way as they sound, because we've seen that and it's boring. And if the audience is smart, let's not underestimate the audience. The audience has seen a lot of movies, read a lot of books, whatever. They know. So if you're going to play with stereotypes or archetypes, you better find a way to make them slightly different. Or maybe start, Tony Soprano, right? Tony Soprano is a gangster that goes to therapy. If he was just a gangster, they'll be like, okay, I've seen Goodfellas. Why am I even watching this? But Tony Soprano has an issue. Again, I'm going to, very classic example, but he has an emotional issue. He's a gangster, And now it doesn't surprise us, but back in the day with The Sopranos, 95, 96, I don't know when it came out. It was an amazing concept. And sometimes, it happened to me. I have to write gangsters. So what do I do with gangsters? What haven't I seen with gangsters? I don't know. Gangsters singing, gangsters crying. What can I do with them?
Gangster that doesn't want to be a gangster but has to? He's forced by his family?
Yeah.
Or her family, yeah.
That could lead somewhere. As long as you can find, to me the most difficult thing is finding the emotional connection. And by emotional, I don't mean I have to laugh or cry all the time. It's just that it resonates, that it makes them three-dimensional, human, and that your intuition says this is something that a lot of humans could relate to, right? That it's just that's, it's, since writers are usually very smart, as a teacher, as an instructor used to tell me in grad school, the smartest people in the room, we have a lot of ideas. And I don't mean that in a good way. Ideas are a problem because you might get away with them and there's nothing in you there. It's just, we have stored all these ideas. Like, well, what if, what if the cop suddenly decides to rob the bank? Sure, it sounds fun, but what's in there that you care about? Why do you relate to that? Because he's having a crisis, about his identity and his profession. Well, now we're on to something. Then it's not about robbing the bank. It's about what if a cop no longer believes in the law because he thinks the system is crooked? I don't know, I'm making this up. Okay, that's actually interesting. Tell me more. So I feel like, it's about finding your personal connection.
Okay, so we know some cliche character archetypes. What about scenes? What are some things you see students do, or maybe you did in the beginning, that they were too cliche, whether it's showing up at the best friend's wedding and, does anyone here object? And then, just the typical
Yes.
romantic comedy.
I would say scenes about couples arguing tend to lead to a lot of cliches, especially if you just play them out very dramatically. And I'm not saying couples don't have very dramatic arguments, because they do. But what if you introduce certain elements in there that makes suddenly the scene different? And I'm gonna quote on this Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She said something that I loved, and it blew my. She's such an amazing everything. But she said, I always have to try to have 3 different conflicts happening to the character at the same time, and they're all not of the same magnitude. So, for example, she needs to get an abortion. It's very hot in the room, and she doesn't like how her hair looks. So she's trying to figure out or tell her significant other that she needs to get an abortion while checking herself in the mirror, while also noticing that she has sweaty armpits. So she writes comedy mostly. So that I can see how that can be a dramedy, right? It's very dramatic, but it's also very funny because she's distracted. So if the scene were just her saying, we need to talk, I'm pregnant and I need to get rid of the baby, okay, sure, that can be a compelling scene, but it's also, I don't know, if you play it that way, it's a bit conventional. But if she's concerned about her hair, then that sounds very human.
And she's seeing that she's sweating.
Yeah. So,
and she's wondering, did the barista see me this sweaty and disgusting?
Exactly. There's so many options, and she feels like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. I don't want to be pregnant. I'm gross. Like, ugh, I've never felt so ugly. I wish my hair was like straight, So
sure.
I think that's great advice.
And it's your brother's.
Well, you just took it to a whole different level.
Sorry, all right.
No, I'm not judging you. I'm just saying.
Okay. Just that would take the cliche. That would also spin it.
You know what's interesting though? That opens up, because I had this conversation this morning about tone, and I feel like tone is such an important element in a story, and it's something I do think about right away, even though I don't think I can avoid it. Tone is really hard to define what it is, but you recognize it, right? And most of the creators or filmmakers we love have a very specific tone. Like the Coen brothers have a very specific, kind of ironic, sarcastic, sometimes almost depressing tone. It's about plot, it's about character. You don't really know where it's at, but you can sense it. And I was breaking down a story today, actually, and I followed the story through where it led me, and at some point it led to a very dark area that I got scared of. And by the way, I would say getting scared of something is a good sign, because it means there's something very personal to explore. But at the same time, I felt it was so dark that it destroyed my tone. And I got worried I would lose my audience. That's one of those moments where you feel like, if I cringe, not in an interesting way, maybe it's worth considering that direction. And I think it's a valid point.
Sure. So you know that you kind of took it too far and it wouldn't work for the story?
Well, I don't mind telling you what it is, because I'm not going to use it. I mean, I had a character with a situation, and she's trying to figure out how she feels and why she feels so uncomfortable about what's happening to her, right? And she doesn't know. Which is, it's odd. It's not a story where she's trying to get money. And no, the goal of the character is to figure out why she feels the way she feels, right? A situation triggered a feeling, and she doesn't understand it. And it's a very odd thing. I don't know why I do this to myself, because it's not something tangible. First of all, you got to be really careful. Do I want to talk about this subject? Am I qualified to talk about it? Does it actually resonate with me? Or does it just sound, like it would have an impact? And my gut feeling was like, don't go there. Don't go there, because once you introduce certain topics, the story's done unless you want to discuss the consequences of that. And I don't want to be the person doing that. You know, and because I haven't been through it, and I hope it doesn't happen to me, and I gotta be respectful. But if my tone is kind of playful, you gotta be really careful where you go. Some things are just not gonna be funny.
That's a good point.
You know, no matter how you approach it, it's not funny.
Sure.
Like the vibe is dead.
Yeah, yeah. Because then you can't, from that point on, it can't be around comedy.
It can't be another element in your story.
Yeah.
You either make your story about that because you actually will have something to say, or refrain from it. You know.
Sure.
But that, you know, that's. I mean, I want to be really careful. Not everything is material for storytelling, unless, you know, like Michaela Cole, who did I May Destroy You, and you know, the show is about that, but she went through it. You know.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of is that if you showed the character's life up until that point that was light and fun, and then if something horrible happens, and then how their life changes drastically after that. But yeah, you can't continue.
But the story then is about that. And by the way, I'm not against horrible things happening to your character. I mean, I'm just saying there are boundaries to me. And there are things that I haven't experienced that I'd rather not talk about.